this out. This is the new FCOC leader slide for a presentation. I think it's great. As I get started, I want to start off by saying that I'm honored to be a member of this organization. There's nothing that's more energizing to me than spending time with fellow veterans, and to be able to sit with all of you, whether it's face to face like we have in the past, and we'll hopefully do again soon, or virtually like this. I'm just honored to be around fellow warriors. As you'll see from my presentation, my entire career was during the Cold War. So I have tremendous respect, even awe, for those of you who face combat, who are in locations where somebody was shooting at you, trying to kill you. That was not my personal experience, but I am still honored to have worn the uniform of my country for 29 years. I'm going to try to come up with a little more exciting title than my Air Force career, but that's what this is going to be about today. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I ended up in the Air Force. We all kind of had different paths, I think. Some were drafted, some volunteered, some were volunteered. But my path is really unique. I thought I'd start with that. Briefly summarize my career. One of the things I learned once I was on active duty was that I was actually the next in line of a very, very long tradition of Scots serving in the military. I didn't go through that. And again, while I didn't serve in combat, I had a couple of key events during the course of my career that I picked out that I'll spend a little time describing. Talk about some of the fun experiences that I had, and then wrap up with, what does one learn from wearing a uniform in the United States military for 29 years. To start off, I ended up in the Air Force. I had no intention of going to the military. I had been accepted to college. You can tell it's not exactly a military haircut there. This is in my dorm room out at college. When I was heading off to my first year of school, my grandfather, who was a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel, suggested I consider ROTC because I needed some scholarship money in private university. And I looked him in the eye and told him, "Grandpa, I'm not the military. It's just not the way of life for me." So there I am, living in my dorm room. This cute photo you see right here, this beautiful young lady was my girlfriend at the time. She has now been my wife going on 47 years. But then in 1972, a rather interesting thing happened. I had started my second year at Loyola Marymount University, and in December of that year, President Nixon, because of a breakdown of Paris peace talks, announced the mining of Haiphong Harbor and the resumption of bombing of North Vietnam. And as a result, a group of students at Loyola decided and announced that the next morning they were going to march down the middle of the campus to the flagpole, and they were going to take down the American flag at noon the next day. Well, I was having classes in this building right here. This is a Seaver Science Hall at the time, flagpole being right down here in this circle. And so I finished my class right at noon and walked out to watch the event. And when I got out there, the ROTC unit, Air Force ROTC unit, was the only one on campus, had fallen out in uniform, had formed two concentric circles around the flagpole, and told the protesters that they could protest all they wanted, but they were not going to touch that American flag. Fortunately, nothing turned violent. There was some shouting back and forth. Eventually, the crowd dissipated. And I stood there a few more minutes and looked at those ROTC cadets and said, you know what, I belong with those guys. They're the ones that are out here doing the right thing. And so 1973, I headed off to ROTC field training. Actually, I left 47 years ago today when I headed for that training. For those of you who are firearms expert, please forgive the poor trigger discipline in this photo. It was 1973. I was 20 years old, and I really didn't understand a lot about firearms at the time. But I did join the ROTC unit that year, and on May 31st of 1975, that same beautiful young lady was by then my wife, and she pinned on my gold bars as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. So I was a commissioned second lieutenant, 31 May 1975. That was 45 years and like 10 days ago. because it was during the post-Vietnam drawdown, I didn't go active duty for 14 months. I started in July of '76, as Scott said earlier, and served until October of 2005, a little over 29 years. I was a communications and information officer. AFSC is the equivalent, Air Force equivalent of an MOS, for those of you who know the services. And during that 29 years, I had 19 different assignments at 11 different locations. I was honored to have 3 tours as a squadron commanding officer, and got promoted to colonel in 1998. Scott summarized my decorations. There's a photo or a graphic of them there. Here's what that looks like. 29 years in different locations. The ones in the U.S. and the one up there in Germany were PCS locations. Italy, Turkey, Saudi Arabia were deployments. Colombia and Chile were TDYs to support counter-drug operations. So, kind of an interesting range of experience. I mentioned earlier that at the time I joined, I didn't really understand my family's military history. Again, this is me. I served from '76 to 2005. But I am the son of a naval aviator. Very proud of that. My dad was in the U.S. Navy as a carrier pilot from 49 to 53. He was actually at sea on a carrier when I was born. He loved serving in the military. You can imagine him being a naval aviator, me going to the Air Force. Yes, I did take some grief for that. Not my direct family, but my wife's father kind of served in the military. The reason I say kind of is because he graduated from the University of the Philippines and the ROTC program there in June of 1941, was supposed to report for duty later that year. And by the time his duty date rolled around, the Japanese had invaded and taken over the Philippines. And on advice from some senior officers, he burned his uniforms and papers because they were very harshly treating members of the Philippine military, and he didn't really want to submit to that. And so this is the only photo of him in uniform that still exists. I talked about my grandfather being the one who encouraged me to pursue ROTC. This is him. He was in before and during World War II and up into the 1950s. He's actually the one who gave me my first oath of office for me as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. My other grandfather was a doughboy in World War I. Actually served in France and was in the Meuse Argonne at the time of the armistice in November of 1918. Back to my wife's family, her grandfather actually served in the Army during the Spanish-American War, fought in Cuba, and then went to the Philippines and actually fought in against the Philippine insurrection there until 1901. My great-grandfather, the one there in the red circle, didn't serve in the active military, but he was in the ROTC at Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Worcester, Massachusetts in the 1890s. And his father was a veteran of the Civil War. One in the center there, Dwight Rufus Scott, my great-great-grandfather, fought at both Gettysburg and Antietam. On either side of them are his 2 brothers. 3 brothers fought in the 10th Massachusetts Infantry, and another brother served in the artillery. And even their father, he actually enlisted in the Union Army at the age of 49 in 1861. He was eventually told that he needed to go home and take care of his other children. They really did not need someone of his age in the Army. So he was sent home. What was interesting is that I'll summarize this little write-up here, that the company commander was killed in action before he documented that he had released Francis Arva Scott from duty, and so he was carried as a deserter for about 20 years before his son finally worked out all the details. And it goes back even further than that. My ancestor Moses Scott was one of 4 brothers who were on the muster roll of the 1st Company of the Green Mountain Boys. And he actually fought at the Battle of Bennington in Bennington, Vermont, 1777. So my military heritage traces all the way to the Revolutionary War. Now, a couple of incidents during my career that I think you might find interesting. In the late 1970s, I was stationed at Mcclellan Air Force Base in Wichita, Kansas, that hosted the 381st Strategic Missile Wing, Titan II missiles. They were scattered in the countryside around the base. The base was about 20 miles in that direction. The little town of Rock, Kansas was right here, and the missile complex is the red circle you see there at the edge of the screen. That was 37 or 533-7. The Titan was a liquid fuel system. It's been deactivated for many years. There's actually a Titan missile complex set up as a museum south of Tucson, Arizona. This is that site. Here in the center, you see that's the launch tube and the blast door over it. I'll talk about these later, but it was liquid fuel that had a mixture of fuel and oxidizer, and when they were mixed together, they ignited. That's what propelled the rocket. And they had these two storage tanks above ground. The overall complex looked like this. The black and white there in the center was the launch tube and the rocket. In the center is where the entry portal is. You went through a security process to get down, go down those stairs, and then there was one passageway to the launch tube, another one to the crew capsule. Ken Cornelison has talked before about he was with Minuteman. A Minuteman launch crew controlled 10 missiles. Titan, there was a crew here, and they had control of just the one missile. You can see the missile there in the launch tube. Those platforms you see around it would fold down so they could do maintenance at different levels of the missile. Now, I mentioned the fuel and the oxidizer. The oxidizer was very, very corrosive, and on a fairly regular basis, they would have to go out, take the missile off of alert, remove the warhead, and then go in and have to drain all the fuel, all the oxidizer out of the missile, and change out a lot of seals that were deteriorating because of the caustic chemicals. So having a leak of oxidizer in particular in one of these complexes was actually a fairly common occurrence. But they always declared it a disaster and sent a team out. And then once they found it was relatively minor, they would return to base. So I had a radio communications team that was part of that deployment whenever there was an oxidizer leak. And it was fairly common for them to have to load the equipment, go out to the site, sit in the truck for a couple hours, and then turn around and come back home without doing anything. Well, this is the actual radio equipment that I had to be qualified with, along with my radio operators on, and then that packet there on the left is a tactical antenna that we would take out in the field and set up. So on the field it would look like this, and we could have HF radio communications from the site should that become necessary. Well, in August of 1978, again, we got a call. There was an oxidizer leak out of 37. So my team was going to go out. It was a beautiful day. I didn't have anything on my schedule for the afternoon, so or rather than just dispatching them, I went with them at this particular time. And we went out, came down the road south of the complex. It's kind of, you can barely see it. It's across the bottom of the map here. Right about here, we came past the line of trees, and there was what one of the on-scene commanders over the radio had referred to as a BFRC, big red cloud. And we realized that this was not a minor leak. This, in fact, was a very, very significant one. So we traveled on a little bit farther. We actually set up about a half a mile south of the site down here with our radio equipment. The wind was blowing out of the south, and that cloud hovered over that complex for several days. We were actually the only on-site comm out there for 5 days. So what I thought was going to be just an afternoon rolling out, taking a look at the complex and coming back, ended up being a 5-day field exercise. By the time everything was resolved, there had been two killed, two of the maintenance technicians killed, one permanently disabled, simply from the vapors of that oxidizer, highly caustic as it was. And then eventually they disabled all the systems and buried the sites. I talked about those fuel oxidizer tanks. That's the only thing that's still left is those two concrete pads right there. out in the field in southeastern Kansas. Probably the best thing I got to do during my 29 years was serve as a commanding officer, something a lot of officers pursue, want to do. They hope to be able to do it once in their career. I was blessed with the opportunity to do it 3 times. I took command of the 377th Communications Squadron in Albuquerque, New Mexico for 2 years in 1994. I then took command of the USAF Computer Systems Squadron in Europe in 1998 for 2 years. And then I was dual-hatted as commander of the 612th Air Communications Squadron and the A6 Director of Communications at 12th Air Force for 3 years until my retirement in 2005. The basic responsibility of a unit commander is the morale, welfare, and discipline of all assigned military personnel. One of the ways I did that was to try to make sure we were doing things to keep them happy and well motivated. The downside is, of course, as a unit commander, I got to deal with those that were disciplinary problems. Articles 15, discharges, demotions, those things like that for those that weren't meeting standards. And so that made it a little bit difficult. The most difficult thing I did as unit commander was during that 3rd one at the 612th Air Communications Squadron. I actually had a young airman who was killed in an automobile accident. And I actually chose to preside at his military funeral and presented a folded flag to his mother, which is easily the most difficult thing that I did in my 29 years. AOC is today often used to refer to a particular member of Congress from New York. In Air Force parlance, that means Air Operations Center. The mission of AOC is to plan and execute an air campaign in support of a military campaign. And so late in my career, about the last 5-7 years, I was working exclusively command and control in air operations centers, and I had 2 opportunities to build and expand AOCs for air operations. The first one was for Operation Allied Force 1999. The photo you see there in the top right, the AOC at the time was this building, but it was running. It had been established for the operation in Bosnia, and so it was a NATO operation. It was a NATO AOC. But when the air war over Kosovo started, we were using, among other things, we started flying F-117 fighters, and that required a U.S. classified ATO, which we couldn't generate in this AOC. So I was tasked with taking a team of technicians down there. The local Italian contractor, this was in Vicenza, Italy, the local Italian contractor built a new building in this site, and we built a whole new air operations center wired with a couple of thousand feet of fiber optic cable, 250 network drops, 125 computers, and a complete network control center. You can see me sit in front of that here. And we did all of that in about 2 weeks' time while the air war was being executed every night. So it was a neat opportunity to build a critical capability from the ground up. The next one, this is actually the base in Arizona. When I took command of the Air Communications Squadron, our facilities were here and here, but there was no Air Operations Center for conducting air ops in the Southcom AOR, Central and South America. The buildings that I just marked there were actually designed to do training. Sorry about that. Do training for the ground-launched cruise missile. It was big enough to pull these big old ground-launched Glickem launcher trailers in. And we used it for building up pallets and for deployments. But when it came time that we needed an AOC, it was really the only space big enough for one there. And it saved spending another $60 million to build a new facility. So this is what the inside of the building looked like. To give you an idea of its size, this is a 12-foot satellite dish we set up inside on display. This was actually a change of command ceremony, I think in my retirement. But you can see it's a very high bay, very open building. That's the before shot. This is the aftershock. This is what we made that same vehicle maintenance bay look like for an Air Operations Center. And in fact, this center is being used today to monitor air operations over Central America and a very, very large number of intel, surveillance, and reconnaissance flights that are flying over that area every day for counter-drug operations. Fall of 2002, I deployed to Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia in support of Operation Southern Watch. At this point in time in 2002, we had not yet gone back into Iraq, although Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan was in full operation. In 1996, there was a terrorist attack at the Khobar Towers residential facility in Bahrain, and at that point they moved all U.S. military people out of the city and onto this Saudi air base. This was the compound that they built for us. If it looks like a prison, yeah. Well, this is in fact a double chain link fence with barbed wire. These are guard towers. So it was like living in a prison. But this was the area where we lived, and we actually had to go through numerous security checks just to get in and out of this compound. And the Air Operations Center was actually about 10 miles away. We commuted back and forth. But again, I was the J6 Director of Communications during that deployment, overseeing air operations for both Iraq and Afghanistan. It was hard work, but some of it was a lot of fun. The two photos on the left, the one on the top left was probably the high point of my Air Force career. The trophy I'm holding there, surrounded by several members of my squadron, is the Lieutenant General Harold Mcclellan Trophy, because we were named the best large communications unit in the United States Air Force for 1999. So it was a very, very special day for me and for my team. We also won, right below that, an award from the Air Force Association. The two middle photos, I was in Europe when right after the Berlin Wall came down, and so there was UCOM put together a program called Partnership for Peace, and we were doing a lot of interface with former Soviet bloc nations, getting them ready to become part of NATO. The top center one there, I got to host a group of Czech officers and help them understand how we perform communications for the United States military in Europe. And then I got to do it again. The bottom one, I actually got to go to Poland, meet with the Polish Ministry of Defense and their military. One of the things we got to do was go to their field locations and actually got a weapons competition using their 9mm issue handgun, and I actually won the marksmanship trophy for that one. That was a very special day as well, because that happened to be the same day Poland was invited to join NATO. So we had a big party that night, and a significant amount of vodka was consumed. The ones on I tried to like motivate the troops. There were a group of us officers, I think it was 3 lieutenant colonels and a major at the time. We put together a dance number, kind of a Blues Brothers thing. And we did it once in dress uniforms and once in scrubs. Was a big hit with the troops. And then the bottom right was my rite of passage as a squadron commander, the squadron commander of the USAF CSS in Europe. We maintained the long-haul communications across the European theater. And as squadron commander, I was expected to go with a maintenance team and climb to the top of an 802-foot tower. It was a microwave shot across the English Channel. Full disclosure, I climbed 450 feet. The safety bar where I was attached was very, very corroded, and I had to drag my safety up rather than having it slide. And so I was nearly exhausted at the 450-foot level. I did climb 450 feet, but I rode the elevator the rest of the time. Kind of lessons learned for 29 years. Number one, listen to your elders. If I had listened to the sage advice of my grandfather, I would have been in the ROTC unit 2 years sooner. And after after telling him that was just not the way of life for me, it ended up being my only way of life and has defined who I am to this day. Don't miss opportunities. There's kind of an adage in the military, never volunteer for anything. I am amazed at some of the things I got to do by saying, sure, I'll take that on. It greatly broadened my experience and allowed me to do things and see things that otherwise I would have missed. I mentioned the downside of being a unit commander. Not everyone should serve in uniform. Unfortunately, there are some that join the military for the wrong reasons. Sometimes because they're running away from something. Eventually, somebody, if their heart is not in what they're doing, they will eventually become problematic, and their situations have to be dealt with. And that was part of the downside of my career. Hard work, but great times. I mean, long hours. We were working 18-hour days when we were rebuilding that Air Operations Center in Vicenza, Italy. But again, I showed you some of the photos of some of the fun things I got to do in my career. So it was hard work, but it was a good time. The brotherhood of arms. There's something, and I think it's why I love being part of FCOC so much. We have a connection with an understanding of one another who have worn the uniform that those who have not have trouble grasping. And we are willing to say things and tell things to one another that we may not share with those who haven't been in uniform. I think it's no more evident than with our World War II veterans. A lot of them, their families have never heard their stories, their experiences, but unless they have heard that family member sit down with a fellow veteran and start talking through those kinds of stories, because there are things that we have experienced that we will discuss with one another, but we don't necessarily speak with those who haven't been in uniform. And the last one, it's all about people. My leadership philosophy throughout my career was to get people the resources they needed to do their job, to motivate them, and then get out of their way. If I could do things to keep them pumped up, help them understand the importance of what they were doing, I didn't need to ride them hard or give them direction to do the mission. They understood it, they grasped it, they did it, and they did it well. And working with people like that is what was such an incredible blessing to me for over 29 years. So that is kind of my quick and dirty of what my Air Force career was like. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Wayne, I have a question for you. That prison they built for you, did they also build a swimming pool?
Oh, well, those of you who are not in the Air Force, I'm sure know the old adage that, when you give the Air Force money to build a base, the first thing they build is the officers club, the golf course, the swimming pool, and then they come back for more money for the runway. So, yes, I mean, the dining hall there was fantastic. There was a pool, there was a gym, but keep in mind that at that time, in that location, if we were not on duty at the Air Operations Center, we were inside that fence line. There was no other place to be. And so those facilities were really critical given where we were. I mean, we were 17 miles from the entry gate to the base, and it was nothing but open desert, and we were not allowed through that gate. We could not leave the base during that.
Where were you located in Arizona?
I was at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson. That was a Titan missile wing, also back in the up until the early 1980s, and that Titan Missile Museum is just south of Tucson. They got permission from, believe it or not, from the Russians to keep it open as a museum, but it's still inspected regularly as part of the START troop.
Yeah, we saw that.
Well, Wayne, what was your major in college that resulted in you going to the communications end of the Air Force?
Frank, good question. First off, I went through ROTC on a pilot scholarship. But again, I was commissioned in 1975, and by the time I got my commission, we're in the post-Vietnam drawdown. And so the Air Force had too many pilots. I did not get to go to pilot training. My undergraduate degree was in biology. I was a medical school hopeful at the time. In May of 1976, I got this letter that said, you've been given an assignment based on your educational background and the needs of the Air Force. Well, so I got a degree in biology and they made me a comm guy. But the key differentiator there was to go into comms, highly technical, officers had to have a year of college physics. And you typically only would find that among science majors. So that's, biology to comm, not a strong connection, but the common denominator was physics.
So then you had to go to, in the military and the Army, we would go to training after we got out of, after we were commissioned. So you went to where for your training for communications?
I went to Keystone Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi for 10 months. And then my first assignment after that was to the missile wing in Kansas.
Isn't that also the location of the weather training for most of the military?
The Air Force runs 4 technical training centers, one in Mississippi, 3 in Texas. The one in Mississippi is all electronics. Yes, they do weather training there. It's also where the hurricane hunters, you see the C-130s that fly into hurricanes, they're based at Keystone and Biloxi also.
How did you feel about going from biology and that area into communications and electronics? My gosh, that's
Again, at the time, it's like, I'm going to do what? I mean, they said comm officer. I had to go look it up and figure out what it was. I will tell you that it turned out to be an incredible blessing. I am a firm believer that God directs the steps of men even when they don't necessarily understand what they are. I ended up being in that career field during the whole IT revolution. So I was at the forefront of computers and computer networking technology, a lot of advances in digital radio, satellite systems. I mean, I helped do spectrum management for the space shuttle. I mean, I got to do some really incredible things in a career field that I did not pick, but it turned out to be an incredible blessing.